Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to True Crime, the podcast that helps you find new, emerging, and undiscovered true crime podcasts. I'm Greg, the host and curator of True Crime. Before we get started today, I would like to ask your help. If you're listening to other true crime podcasts and you think they could use a little bump in their listeners, like you think it would be good if more people heard them, just send them a message and tell them to submit an episode to Indie Drop-In. I'll play them on this podcast and expose them to a lot more listeners than they probably have today. It's a good way to help your favorite true crime creator grow just a little bit and share the love with everybody on the Indie Drop-In community. Today's episode is from Killer Heart to Hearts. Killer Heart to Hearts spotlights some of the darkest crimes in history. Some rock the world, while others have been buried deeper than their victims. Journey with Killer Heart to Hearts through the brutal side of humanity. If you like today's episode, make sure to check out the episode description for links to subscribe. All right, let's get this show started.
Begin.
When one of the biggest stars in music, at the pinnacle of his career, ends up shot dead, naked in a seedy Los Angeles motel, investigators are quick to declare justifiable homicide and close the case. So why doesn't any of it make sense? This is Killer Heart to Hearts.
Welcome back to Season 3 of Killer Heart to Hearts. I'm Elise.
And I am Will. Welcome back, you guys. Season 3 premiere.
Yeah.
How exciting.
I know. It is exciting.
I've been waiting for this.
Me too. 13 weeks.
Yeah, I've been excited about this. And for the listeners, we're deciding to switch it up a little bit this season. It's going to be a themed season. Why don't you tell them a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this season we are doing, each case is going to be basically either the murderer or the murdered are a celebrity of some capacity.
Yeah.
Whether it be singer, actor, filmmaker, whatnot. You're probably going to know most of them. Maybe not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah, most of them you'll know. So the first one we're going to do is actually one of my favorite all-time singers, pioneer of soul music. Just an absolute legend. Of course, I'm talking about Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke. What a fantastic voice. What an amazing performer. What a important figure of the 1960s.
And what could he have gone on to achieve?
Right. Yeah.
After his
untimely demise. Yeah. And it's an interesting story. It's not very widely known, I don't believe. Like, I knew of Sam Cooke and his songs long before I knew of how his life ended. And I think that's part of it. That's part of what makes this case unique is, I think, because the way his life ended, I feel, sort of takes away from the successes and the accomplishments of his life itself. And
Absolutely.
You'll understand why when we get into it.
Yeah, so why don't we get into it?
All right, guys. Season 3 premiere. This one's called Born by the River. The summer of 1964 was a particularly brutal one for civil rights in America. In the 14 weeks between mid-June and September's end, there were at least the 6 murders, 29 shootings, 50 bombings, and 60 beatings of civil rights workers. On June 21st, 1964, 3 civil rights activists vanished without a trace. And it would later be learned that they were murdered by members of Mississippi law enforcement. Not exactly surprising, considering that, at the time, approximately 1/2 of all law enforcement in Mississippi were associated with the Ku Klux Klan. Against this backdrop of struggle and violence, there were heroes and there were villains. There were leaders and there were far too many bystanders. There was the stuff of legend, as those with literal microphones rose to meet their moment amidst marches and concerts, where there were anthems calling for equality, unity, and reform. And most notable of these anthems was A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke, released in 1964. And if you're unfamiliar with the musical catalog of Sam Cooke, I'm not really surprised, but shame on you just the same. See, part of what makes this story so tragic is that everyone should know who Sam Cooke is. But the circumstances surrounding his death have, in a way, robbed him posthumously of the kind of fame others far less talented than he have enjoyed. Sam Cooke was born in 1931 in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The fifth of 8 children, the family moved to Chicago in 1933. There, Sam began his musical career at 6 years old in a gospel group called the Singing Children with his siblings. A natural talent, Sam continued as a gospel singer throughout his teenage years, as the lead singer of the Highway QCs, before taking over lead singing duties for the professionally polished gospel recording group, the Soul Stirrers, in 1950. Now, Sam Cooke is credited with bringing gospel music to younger audiences, especially young girls, who often rush the stage at Soul Stirrer shows just to catch a glimpse of Sam in person. And it wasn't long before Sam began to crave an audience larger than that which gospel music could provide. At that time, there were just 2 genres of music in many's eyes: the Lord's music and the devil's. And as a bona fide gospel star, when Sam Cooke recorded his first crossover pop single, Lovable, in 1956, he did so as Dale Cooke, in order to not alienate his gospel fan base. No one was fooled, however, and soon he was recording secular music as Sam Cooke. And even his pastor father gave his fledgling pop career his blessing. As Sam would later recall, quote, "My father told me it was not what I sang that was important, but that God gave me a voice and musical talent, and the true use of his gift was to share it and make people happy." End quote. It would have been a sin not to.
So it kind of seems like Sam Cooke might have been like the first successful crossover artist.
Yeah.
I mean, if there were just 2 types of music.
Well, I mean, there weren't just 2 types.
No, I understand. There's different genres, but to cross over from gospel to mainstream kind of seems like a daring move back then.
Certainly, especially for the son of a minister in Mississippi.
Yeah.
You know, although at this time, they had moved to Chicago, but even so, his roots were firmly embedded in gospel.
Yeah. And he was daring. He wanted to spread his voice.
Absolutely. He was a trailblazer, a pioneer, like what we know as soul, which then, gave way to what we know as R&B. Mm-hmm. None of that would have existed in the way we know it without Sam Cooke. Because Sam Cooke was one of the foremost pioneers of soul music. He was Motown before Motown existed. And at the time of his death, Sam Cooke was one of the biggest music stars on the planet. Second, probably only to Elvis Presley himself. He was handsome, charismatic, and singularly talented. The undisputed king of soul. A long way from his humble beginnings as the son of a preacher. And Sam Cooke wasn't just a singer. He was a prolific songwriter and composer who wrote and recorded 30 top 40 hits between 1957 and 1964, including You Send Me, Cupid, Chain Gang, and Twistin' the Night Away, just to name a few. And Sam Cooke directly influenced some of the biggest names in soul music who followed in his footsteps. Artists like Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Otis Redding, and James Brown. biographer Bruce Ader wrote that Cooke was, quote, the inventor of soul music, and possessed an incredible natural singing voice and a smooth, effortless delivery that has never been surpassed, end quote. And through it all, Sam Cooke was also a central figure in the civil rights movement. Along with his friends, football star Jim Brown, boxer Muhammad Ali, and activist Malcolm X, Sam Cooke campaigned for racial equality, using his influence to effect the change he wanted to see. And while these other activist friends of Sam were more provocative, more militant even, it was Sam Cooke who possessed the greater ability to strike at the heart of racism and segregation in America. The reason? Simple. With his good looks, buttery voice, and unparalleled talent, and thanks to radio and television, Sam Cooke had already been accepted into white American living rooms. And Sam walked the walk. Throughout his years touring the rural and mostly black South with the Soul Stirrers, Sam became keenly aware of how people of color, people like him, were treated in America. And he was prepared to use his celebrity to further their cause. One particular night found Sam alone in a broken-down car when white police officers attempted to harass and intimidate him into pushing the car down the road and out of their town. Undeterred, he identified himself as Sam Cooke, telling the officers if they didn't know who he was, they should go home and ask their wives.
Okay, that's ballsy to say to two white racist cops.
He was a bad man. He was a bad man.
I love it.
And he was once arrested in Louisiana after refusing to be turned away by a hotel that had, at first, accepted his reservation. In Atlanta, he was scheduled to headline an integrated lineup for a Dick Clark show broadcast. The show was predictably threatened by the Klan, which had just bombed a local synagogue, and the National Guard had to be called in. But Sam insisted that the show go on as scheduled. In Arkansas, they told him he'd be performing 2 shows, one for a white audience and one for a black audience. Sam refused and played to a room split literally down the middle, becoming one of the first performers to do so. And when he was to headline a 1961 concert in Memphis, Tennessee, Sam organized a boycott after learning that the audience would be segregated, with the whites downstairs and the blacks way up in the balcony. At first, the other black artists were supportive of Sam and the boycott, until just before showtime, when they all left their rooms to perform at the theater. Only Sam stuck to his word and refused to perform. Instead, passing the time at the infamous Lorraine Motel, where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would later be assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And this act of boycott by Sam, of black empowerment, is often credited as being one of the first real efforts at civil disobedience in the new civil rights movement.
Imagine that. I mean, this boycott must have been the talk of the country. I mean, this could have ruined his whole career. I mean, that's obviously why none of the other singers followed suit.
Right. Well, it's interesting because at this time, when Sam boycotted this show, there was another younger performer you guys might have heard about by the name of Ray Charles. And he heard about this boycott. And he did the same thing on his tour. After Sam did it in Memphis, he did it at another stop on his tour somewhere.
Wow.
Such that by the time Ray Charles's tour made its way to Memphis, they were all integrated audiences.
Wow. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Trailblazer.
You're listening to an episode of Killer Heart to Hearts on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of Killer Heart to Hearts.
And in this era of segregation and profound racial inequality, black-owned businesses, Even record shops that catered to black audiences and featured black artists were hard to come by. In Los Angeles, where Sam Cooke came to call home, there was only one such record store that changed the game. Only one that featured live DJs and a radio show broadcasting from the store's front window. Only one that had white kids making their way from the valley all the way to South Central Los Angeles. Dolphins of Hollywood. Founded by legendary black entrepreneur John Dolphin, Dolphins of Hollywood became one of the most famous record shops in the country. Contemporary black artists performed there, gave live on-air interviews there, and mingled with their fans there, signing autographs. The shop got its name, Dolphins of Hollywood, due to the fact that blacks weren't allowed to own businesses in actual Hollywood at the time. And this was John Dolphin's way of bringing Hollywood to South Central. He was even quoted as saying, "If blacks can't go to Hollywood, I'll bring Hollywood to blacks." Sam Cooke was an artist, a showman. And John Dolphin taught Sam Cooke show business. You see, also within the walls at Dolphins of Hollywood was a recording studio that John Dolphin used to record black artists under his Recorded in Hollywood label. And John Dolphin taught Sam Cooke that it was through music publishing that the real money was made. And what's more than that, when you own the publishing rights to your music, you control it. And in 1959, Sam Cooke formed his own publishing company, almost unheard of for a black artist at the time. But Sam had learned the importance of taking ownership of his songs. And soon after, he founded his own record label, SAR Records. And the first SAR release came in 1960 and was by a little gospel group from Chicago, the Soul Stirrers. In 1961, Sam signed to RCA Records, and by the beginning of '62, he was their best-selling singles artist behind only Elvis. And as he toured the world with the likes of Little Richard, Sam recognized that he no longer needed to seek out white audiences. They were now flocking to him in droves. And Sam Cooke was making RCA a lot of money. And yet, when Sam repeatedly asked them to review his payment accounts, RCA steadfastly refused. Enter accountant Alan Klein. Alan Klein was introduced to Sam Cooke by Philadelphia DJ Jocko Henderson, and Klein persuaded Sam to allow him to audit RCA's books on Sam's behalf. The audit resulted in Sam receiving buckets of cash from RCA that was owed to him. It also resulted in a renegotiation of Sam's contract with RCA, and a 5-year deal for Alan Klein to be Sam's business manager. Klein had secured a groundbreaking new deal with RCA for Sam, making him one of the first black artists to fight for and win the publishing rights to his own music. Well, sort of. A holding company, Tracy Limited, was created, named after Sam's middle daughter. And the terms of the new contract with RCA stipulated that Tracy Limited would produce and own Sam's recordings moving forward, but give RCA exclusive rights to distribute them for 30 years. And after the 30 years, the rights would revert back to Tracy Limited. However, Alan Klein, the shifty little shit-sipper that he was, listed himself as the owner and Sam as his employee in the Tracy Limited corporate paperwork. And Sam was tricked into signing that paperwork without fully understanding its contents. Essentially, Alan Klein owned the rights to all of the recordings made since the contract renegotiation with RCA. And Sam Cooke worked for him. And by the way, this would not be the last time Alan Klein fucked over an artist just to line his own pockets. He similarly pulled this contractual fine print, sleight of hand bullshit on the Rolling Stones to the tune of millions of dollars. And even shares some of the blame for the Beatles breaking up. The fucking Beatles! After he was named their business manager and put in charge of their Apple Corps label. And Sam Cooke had just discovered that Alan Klein, the person he trusted to look out for his best interests and manage his career, had fucked him over on the night of December 10th, 1964. And he vowed changes would be made. But all in due time. This night was for celebrating. Fresh off a string of recent show dates that left him flush with $5,000 cash in his pocket, Sam spent the evening enjoying dinner at Martoni's, a chic LA eatery and watering hole for the Hollywood elite, with Al Schmidt, his close friend and longtime producer, and Schmidt's wife. Sam eventually made his way to some music industry people he knew at the bar of the restaurant. And there, a 22-year-old woman caught Sam's eye sitting with a guitar player he knew. Her name was Elisa Boyer. Before long, they were cuddling in a booth. And then, gone at 1 a.m. into the Los Angeles night in Sam's new Ferrari. Off to PJ's nightclub to meet up with Al Schmidt and his wife, with whom Sam had been dining earlier. At the nightclub, a verbal confrontation between Sam and a guy Sam thought was hitting on Elisa Boyer, who at that point asked Sam to drive her home. It was about 2 a.m. Now, that is about as much of what happened that night that could be independently corroborated. And to believe this next part is to believe Elisa Boyer. And according to her statement, Sam ignored her request to be taken home and, instead, ended up driving her, against her will, 15 miles to the $3 Hacienda Motel in South Central Los Angeles. Sam got out to register for a room while Boyer remained in the Ferrari. Alone. And when the night manager, Bertha Franklin, noticed Sam had a female in the car, she demanded that he register as Mr. and Mrs. It was 1964, after all. You didn't just check into a motel with a young woman. So Sam registered as Mr. and Mrs. Sam Cooke. Now, why the actual fuck would someone as famous as Sam Cooke check into a room you can rent by the hour with a hostage being held against her will using his real name? According to Elisa Boyer, after registering, Sam pushed her into the room and onto the bed where he began to rip off her clothes, intent on raping her, but stopped to let her go to the bathroom. And there, she tried to lock the bathroom door, but the latch was broken and the window had been sealed shut with fresh paint. And when she emerged from the bathroom, a now naked Sam Cooke began groping her before he stopped again, because he now had to go to the bathroom. I don't know about you, but this seems to me like an awful lot of bathroom breaks mid-sexual assault. And what kind of assailant keeps leaving his victim alone everywhere? And her story goes, while Sam was in the bathroom, Elisa Boyer grabbed her clothes and ran out of the room, inadvertently scooping up most of Sam's clothes in the process. She ran to a nearby phone booth and called police. Now, when Sam came out of the bathroom, Boyer was gone, with his clothes. And in a drunken rage, he wrapped himself in his coat, his only remaining piece of clothing, and descended upon the motel office where he was convinced the night manager, Bertha Franklin, was harboring Elisa Boyer. Okay, let it also be known that to believe this next part is to believe Bertha Franklin, as no one else was there. But Bertha Franklin claimed that the encounter with Sam at the motel office quickly turned violent as Sam broke down the office door and assaulted her. Bertha Franklin would later testify, quote, He grabbed both of my arms and started twisting them and asked me, where was the girl? I started kicking. I tried to bite him through the jacket. I was fighting, biting, scratching, everything. End quote. Bertha Franklin told police that she scrambled away from Sam for her .22 pistol and fired 3 shots, one of which tore through Sam's heart and lungs. "Lady, you shot me," was all Sam could say before he collapsed. Oh, did I mention Elisa Boyer was a prostitute? Yes, there are many things I've yet to mention about this story that just don't make any damn sense. For instance, not only was Elisa Boyer a prostitute, but Bertha Franklin also had a criminal record for pimping. And in addition to prostitution, Elisa Boyer would later in life be sent to prison in 1979 for 25 years for the shooting death of her boyfriend. No, these were not women above getting their hands dirty. Is it possible that the whole thing was a setup? That Sam was lured to the Hacienda Motel and robbed before being murdered? Certainly can't be discounted. Especially seeing as that $5,000 Sam had been flashing around Martoni's earlier in the evening was never recovered. Only $108 found in a money clip in the Ferrari. Where did all that cash go? Also, and this question can't be overstated, why the fuck would the world's most famous singer kidnap a hooker to a $3 motel? Why would he have to? Sam Cooke was a player, to be sure, but with his status, he could be a player with his pick of young beauties at the Four Seasons or the Beverly Hills Hotel. Most who knew the singer refused to accept the official story. It seemed so unlike the man they knew and loved. They believed that his death was indeed the result of a setup, that Elisa Boyer and Bertha Franklin conspired to rob Sam. After all, the Hacienda Motel was a well-known location for pimps and sex workers, and Boyer, according to this theory, lured him there. And now there are other elements of the case that also don't add up. Sam had been shot with a .22 pistol, but the gun registered to Bertha Franklin was a .32. And how does the bullet that killed Sam Cooke get taken into police evidence and then immediately go missing? And Sam's autopsy revealed a 2-inch bump on his head, and Bertha Franklin, for her part, claimed that after she shot Sam, she dropped the loaded gun and took to beating him with a wooden broom handle. Well, that makes perfect sense, right? You're so terrified for your life that you're being attacked that you grab a gun and shoot him. But he keeps coming at you, so you then drop the loaded gun and defend yourself with a stick? And what's more, after all the fighting and scuffling she described in her version of events, Bertha Franklin had no marks or injuries on her when she testified before cameras only 5 days after she killed Sam. And furthermore, no guest at the motel that night reported hearing any gunshots or sounds of an altercation. But the owner of the Hacienda Motel just happened to be on the phone with Bertha Franklin at the exact time of the incident, 3 o'clock in the morning, and later testified to hearing much of her struggle with Sam Cooke on the other end of the line. How fortuitous for Bertha Franklin. Crime scene photos showed abrasions on Sam's body, but those close to him raised alarms about the extent and nature of his injuries. Legendary singer Etta James, who viewed Sam's body at his funeral, wrote in her memoir that Sam's head was, quote, practically disconnected from his shoulders. That's how badly he'd been beaten. His hands were broken and crushed. They tried to cover it up with makeup, but I could see the massive bruises on his head. No woman with a broomstick could have inflicted that kind of beating against a strong, full-grown man. End quote. It should be noted that Exactly none of the injuries Etta James reported seeing were mentioned in Sam Cooke's official autopsy report. And these discrepancies and more have led many to wonder if Sam was beaten and killed elsewhere before being dumped at the Hacienda Motel. Others still blamed Sam's death on his business manager, Alan Klein. After all, Sam had just discovered that everything he thought to be true about Tracy Limited was a lie, and had privately told those closest to him that he was going to fire Alan Klein. Had Alan murdered Sam to maintain his wrested control over his publishing millions? Much of the mystery shrouding the death of Sam Cooke stems from the fact that the LAPD conducted barely any investigation at all, declaring it a justifiable homicide in self-defense after a mere 5-day inquest. But they didn't give a shit. Just another dead Negro, emblematic of the racism that permeated the LAPD in the 1960s. And Sam Cooke's close friend, Muhammad Ali, would later note, quote, "If Cooke had been Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, or Ricky Nelson, the FBI would be investigating." End quote.
You're listening to an episode of Killer Heart to Hearts on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of Killer Heart to Hearts.
Now, there's a thought. What about the FBI? Let's not forget who Sam Cooke's friends were. Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X. All three powerful black activists who at one time or another were the subject of FBI investigations. Through his association with them, had the FBI come to realize that Sam Cooke was becoming too powerful in his social stature as a black artist, activist, and entrepreneur? After all, a powerful, strong-willed black man in the predominantly white popular culture was roundly perceived as a threat at the time. And Sam Cooke knew just how to use his celebrity to advocate for change. In a socioeconomic sense, Sam Cooke represented a challenge to the power structure of the time, which undoubtedly made him some very dangerous enemies. A lot has changed since the 1960s. The neighborhoods surrounding the Hacienda Motel burned to the ground the summer following Sam Cooke's death during the Watts riots. Dolphins of Hollywood is now a taco stand. But the music of Sam Cooke lives on. Even if some long-dead thieving asshole's estate still, to this day, gets every penny.
So to this day, this case is closed under the assumption that this was justified homicide?
Correct. This is a closed case.
I mean, this is just the most egregious form of... I don't even know the words for it. Like, it's just a lack of humanity to not investigate. I mean, the way you've laid it out here, there is no doubt that this was a setup.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the official version of events is not really what happened. It just doesn't make any sense. None of it just doesn't add up.
Yeah, especially when you say that Elisa Boyer then went to jail for 25 years for killing someone else.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a pattern there.
Yeah. And it was this under the same circumstances. Like she killed her boyfriend who she claimed was attacking her. Yeah. There's a lot about this that just doesn't make sense. Not the least of which is Sam Cooke, he would not need to do this. You know what I mean? He would not need to do this. First of all, I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but how do you rape a prostitute?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a subject that is very easy to debate back and forth. You know, people will have their opinions. I do think that there is a way in which, prostitution, like there is rape there that can be claimed. But under these circumstances, it does seem very unusual. I mean, he was leaving her alone. She had opportunity to escape
As soon as they got to the motel, he immediately left her alone in his car while he went and checked in. She could have left then.
Yeah.
She could have just opened the door and be gone into the night.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the way that he died, and the fact that Bertha shot him and then beat him and claimed self-defense and biting marks and all of that, which were never found. Nothing adds up in this story.
Doesn't make any sense.
And then going back to that, she had, I think it was a 22, but it didn't add up to what the bullet was that was recovered.
He was killed with a 22, but the gun that she had registered as her gun that would have been there for her to shoot him with
was different.
Was a 32. Right.
And then the bullet disappeared.
And then the bullet disappeared.
Yeah. So there's cover up.
Yeah.
Some kind of cover up
in some way, it certainly seems like it. And it could just be as simple as LAPD just didn't care. They didn't care. You know, they're like,
clearly.
Oh, he's a dead black man. Who gives a shit?
Right.
Case closed.
Right. Even though he was as famous as Elvis Presley.
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't matter.
No. Mm-mm.
I mean, death is death. I'm not saying that celebrity, he should have special privileges, but I mean, I do think that his case should have been investigated.
Certainly.
To some extent.
Certainly. Yeah. And where did that $5,000 cash go?
Right, exactly. The only money that was left was money that was found in the car, which they probably just didn't know about.
Right. But Sam himself, like, what an amazing person.
That's the thing. It's like, what could he have gone on to achieve?
Right. He wasn't without his flaws. He was a bit of a playboy, a bit of, a player. He definitely
was not the first or the last.
No, he did have, he had his wife and his family that was met with tragedy as well. He lost his son. His son, I think his name was Vincent, drowned when he was 4 years old.
Oh my God.
They were playing in the pool and the mother went inside briefly and the boy fell in and drowned. And I think that was a big wedge in their relationship that kind of led to maybe some, Sam stepping out a bit. He did have some children out of wedlock. Wasn't a perfect person, but he was a very important figure of the time.
Yeah.
And his music is just, if you have never listened to Sam Cooke, I think that you all should go do that right now because it's just some of the best soul music that you'll ever hear.
And I do find it interesting that he was such a fixture with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And yet, me personally, I haven't heard his name lumped in with them very much in history books or anything.
Right, because the official version of events is that he was killed in self-defense when he was trying to assault and or rape someone.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the kind of legacy that you want in an artist.
A shame.
But yeah, I mean, his song "A Change Is Gonna Come" has become the quintessential civil rights anthem.
Yeah.
And do you know how he wrote it? He wrote that song shortly after the incident in Louisiana where he was arrested for refusing to be turned away from a hotel that had accepted his reservation. So basically, in a nutshell, they knew who Sam Cooke was when he made the reservation. And he made a reservation not only for himself, but his family, his crew, his band, everybody that toured with him. And they got there, and all of these black people, came into the hotel, and they were all turned away. And Sam refused to leave, and they made a big scene. And then eventually they did leave, and they went down the road a bit, and police officers came and found them and arrested them for creating a disturbance at the hotel. So shortly after that was when he wrote "A Change Is Gonna Come." And the impetus for that was "Blowin' in the Wind" by Bob Dylan, another great civil rights anthem that was written and released before "A Change Is Gonna Come." And Sam Cooke heard "Blowin' in the Wind" and was, on the one hand, amazed by it, And on the other hand, ashamed that it wasn't a black man.
Mm.
He thought, and that might have come out wrong, but I don't mean it in any kind of resentment way. He just felt that, why aren't we as black artists? Why didn't we write Blowing in the Wind?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we should be writing these. And then the incident in Louisiana, and then Sam wrote A Change Is Going to Come and never lived to see the success that it came with.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the story of A Change Is Going to Come.
Yeah. Good opening to our season 3.
Yeah. One of my favorite singers. So, you guys should definitely try to familiarize yourself with a couple of his songs. And I bet you're going to listen to some of his songs and you're going to be like, oh, I know this song.
Yeah.
And you never knew that it was by Sam Cooke. I mean, the man wrote 30 top 40 hits in 7 years.
Yeah.
Think about that. 30 top 40 hits in 7 years.
That's amazing.
And at the time, a lot of artists, they weren't like album artists. They were singles artists. So they wouldn't write a whole album. They would just write singles, and they would produce singles and release singles with B-sides. So it wasn't as much of an investment, I'm going to record an album. He could just concentrate on writing hit songs. And that's what he did. All right, guys. Well, that is Born by the River, the story of the tragic death of Sam Cooke. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and make sure to catch the next episode of Killer Heart to Hearts. Killer Heart to Hearts is produced, written, and hosted by Elise Budell and William Cannon, and is engineered by Jordan Calhoun.
Thanks again for listening to True Crime by Indie Drop-In Network. If you would like to nominate a true crime podcast to be featured, just send me a tweet at Indie Drop-In. I'd also love to hear if one of our featured podcasts is now your favorite show. Indie Drop-In survives off ad revenue and listener donations. If you would like to contribute, please consider buying me a coffee. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Indie Drop-In. If you look at the very bottom of the episode description, I put a link in there to make it really easy. Indie Drop-In has many other shows that you also might like. Just go to indiedropin.com. All right, see you next week.